All right, guys, so if you can go to, again, session 11 files, there's a single Photoshop file in there called depth map. If you could open that up into Photoshop. So this is already a put together composite. This was one of the versions of ones that we've actually worked on. And you can see, I don't know, yeah, I've got some shadows that are actually happening in here. I'm going to go ahead and collapse my shadows group. I've got the composite in here. I've done my hue saturation adjustments on all. So basically it's relatively finished. What's not finished about this though is any sort of depth of field. As a matter of fact, when I shot this thing, I was early in my career of doing composites and I wasn't presetting focus to where my subject was going to be. So the real focus of this is probably closer to the tree than it actually is to the figure. But nonetheless, we're going to emulate depth of field in here. Now we did this last week when we were actually doing the puppet warp girl image, the man-made background image. You remember, we actually put a blur on the background. We put a layer mask on that smart filter that was causing the blur, and it was a reflected gradient. So it's sort of the foreground of that composite was soft, where the figure was sharp, and then as it moved towards the background, it got dark. It went out of focus again. I mean, that's sort of what we created. We're going to do a variation of that here, except the variation that we're going to do here uses, there's actually a blur filter in Photoshop that emulates exactly how a lens works. And it is, so what it does is, it takes the information that you get it, and it reconstructs what that would actually, what would happen, how that would really appear going through a camera lens. You can actually use this same filter to design your own lenses, or to modify your lenses, basically. So the blur effect that you get is truly what you would see in a depth of field if the image was real and you were to photograph it, which is very different than a blur effect that you get by just using a Gaussian blur and then a mask to try to control where the blur is and where it isn't. So it's a little bit complicated on how to do it, but once you get to doing it this way, whatever, you will never go to creating a depth of field any other way. You simply won't, I can promise you that. All right, so to do this first, well, we're just going to start here. So I need everybody to select the very top layer of this. It's actually a color correction layer because we need to do this work on top of it. We need to build what's called a depth map first, but we're going to build it and then I'm going to explain to you guys what it really is. So the first thing we need to do is actually draw a line down to determine where we want our sharpest focus point to actually be. So if your rulers are not showing, go up to the view menu, come down and put a check mark right by rulers so that your rulers are visible, because we pull guides off of the rulers. So if you click then on the ruler at the very top and drag down, and I'm going to pull a line down that's going to run through, basically run through the middle of her feet. This lets me know where I need the sharpest plane of focus to actually be, or where I want that to appear. And you're going to see why in just a second, because we're going to lose sight of the image and I need to be able to adjust where this thing is going to go. So our next move on this is we're going to add an adjustment layer to this. So come over to the adjustment layer. It's at the very bottom. Hang on one second, guys. I gotta make sure I started this. Yep. Okay. So add adjustment layer, and if you click on it, there are two gradient labels that exist here in the adjustment layers. There is gradient maps that we have been working with last week when we were doing our extreme color correction, but then there's also just plain gradient, although it's a gradient ... I want you to click on the gradient ... And a window will actually open up, and in this case, in my case, I don't have my default colors of black and white actually set. And I need those here. So I'm going to hit the D key, and I cannot reset my foreground and background colors with this dialog box open. So I'm going to cancel out of that really quickly. I'm going to hit the letter D to get my foreground and background colors to default to black and white. They are. So then again, add an adjustment layer to the very top. And actually that's not on the very top, so I'm going to cancel that and get rid of it. Again, I want this up on top of everything. I want it on top of the correction curves, all on the figures, on top of everything. Finally, hopefully this time it'll work, add a gradient on the top of that. In the gradient drop down at the very top, if you click on it's a drop down menu, so actually the type of gradient at the very top, click on that, and it's the same thing that opens up when we use the gradient tool over when we're creating shadows. There is a set of folders in here that contain pre-made gradients. You want to open up the basics folder and you want to click on the very first one that's actually going from foreground color to background color, and in this case, because they're black and white, it's going from black to white. So that's the one we actually want. Now, you don't want to click OK yet. What you will simply want to do, because we've got other things we've got to set in this dialog box, simply click outside the boundary of what looks like that inner window. So I'm just going to click in the area that's over underneath the word cancel. That menu flops back up out of the way. Then underneath it, we're going to change the style of this. The style are the little icons that run across, when we do gradients in Photoshop. But if you click on that drop-down menu, you can come down to reflected. And when you get reflected, this is basically what the reflected gradient was that we were using last week. It starts with background color, goes to foreground color, and then back to background color. At this stage of the game, and you can't do it after the fact, so you really need to do it at this stage of the game, we need to actually you can actually drag the gradient up and down. You can move it up and down into your scene. And what we're trying to do is build a gradient map. And what happens in a gradient map is this. Anything that a gradient map is in that's in black will be in focus. Anything that's in the gradient map that is in white will be out of focus. And anything that's a gray in between black and white will be a degree of focus falling off. So in the area that is the most black that I've just moved down to be right over the plane of focus that I want, that will be sharp. As you get into this middle area of grays into here, the focus will start to fall off. It'll start to get softer, and then by the time you get to this white area up here, it will be way, way, way out of focus. However, my depth of field is too wide right now. This would be like me shooting with a wide-angle lens at f/16. I need to narrow my depth of field so that it becomes more important. And you do that using scale. If you come over to your scale, if you hover your cursor right over the word that says scale, you'll get a scrubby slider. If you click and you drag to the left, you'll notice that I'm compressing that area of black that is as it gradates out to white on both sides. So I think that's a little too much. I'm going to open mine back up a little bit. So if you want yours to be roughly the same as mine, I'm around to 75%. That seems about right to me. I'm going to pull it down just a little bit more. I'm feeling pretty good about where this thing is right now. So I'm simply going to click OK. Now, I should have actually put another mark on this to begin with because we need a number. There's a number value that we need, and I'll show you what it is. So temporarily turn off the eyeball for the gradient that we just made. This tree is in mid-ground. This tree should not be as soft focus as all of the other trees that are right next to it, because all the other trees that are right next to it are much further away in my scene. They should actually be softer. So I need to create a tone to control the focus for this tree. To do that, I'm going to drag out another gradient line. I'm actually just a place that I actually want it to be. So I'm going to pull something down so it's sort of right in the middle of the, sort of down near the bottom of the tree. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pull it down a little bit more. If you need to move your gradient lines, it's the move tool does it. So hit the V key. It'll let you grab the gradient tool and drag more. Yes.
Can you come back here?
Sure.
So when I go to do the gradient, it like automatically flips it.
That's actually. No, go ahead and click on that. Yep, and just click on here, and then click on reverse. Okay, and then so now selected, and you're good to go. All up and down, okay. And then makes it skinnier and bigger.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I just pulled down another guideline because what I'm trying to do is figure out where this tree really is. I need a tone on this tree. So I'm going to drag this line down a little bit more. I'm just sort of, okay, that's where the tree really is. That's where it starts. And I'm also going to pull another line out just so I've got a crosshair. What I need to do is figure out what tone of gray I need on my gradient map in this area right here. So to do that, now I know where it is, turn your gradient back on, and then hover your cursor right over that intersection, and you can see I'm getting a readout of 202. It's a very light gray, but it's a light gray that I need to actually do nonetheless. So I'm going to simply, on my little piece of paper that I'm keeping handy, write down 202 so I know what that value is. Then I can actually turn off my gradient map. I'm going to add a blank layer above this gradient map right now. So simply click on add a blank layer above it. The first thing that I'm going to do to build my gradient map is the girl. So I'm going to scroll down till I can find where she is. I'm going to hover over the thumbnail of the girl. You don't need to select that layer, just hover over the thumbnail. Hold down the command key and click once, and her selection, her outline is loaded. Go back up to this very top layer, and we need to fill that with black. Black is my foreground color, so Option Delete fills it with black. Command D to deselect. So now I've actually got, again, this is all going to come together into one single thing to be my gradient, to be my depth map. But remember, I said the tree also needs a tone in there as well. So I'm going to hit the X key to flip my foreground and background colors. I'm going to click on the foreground color to open up the color picker, and I'm going to change its values to 202 for all the RGBs. So the R is 202. Tab key to go to the B, 202. Tab key to go to the blue, 202. And say OK. This is now a very light shade of gray. I need to now select the tree. And the beautiful thing about these things is that these selections don't need to be as perfect as when we're trying to knock figures out, because they're basically dealing with things like focus. Select your background layer at the very, very, very bottom, because we want it active so that when we use the quick selection tool, it will go for the tree and not something else. Then I'm going to grab the quick selection tool, and I'm going to come over and drag it down on the tree, and I want to select pretty much all the trees. So make sure you get the roots, make sure you get the green moss that's on the side. I'm going to come up, make sure you have the whole tree. If you get a little bit of the background, if it spills over the background on that right edge, just hold down your Option key, and you can actually click small areas to just tighten the selection up. However, it's not going to be a total life and death thing again, because this is all about a focus issue. So I've got a selection of my tree going right now. I'm going to go back up to that layer that's at the very top that has the black girl on it, the outline, or the silhouette of the girl on it. And I've got an active selection going right now. That light gray is my foreground color, so I'm going to hold down the Option key and hit delete, and it will fill where the tree is with a light gray. Command D to deselect. And then finally I'm going to turn the gradient back on. This is my depth map, and if you can see what's going on right here, again, everything that is in black will actually stay in focus. Everything that is gray will actually be less in focus. Everything that is white will be completely out of focus. Yes, Jack?
My tree doesn't show up, but the gray's there, and then I turn on the gradient.
Did you place it up on the very top figure along with the girl? So go to the very top. That's where you want to put all the tree, the girl, the figure, all of that kind of stuff. Now, in this case, I think I can probably clean this up a little bit more as well. So I'm going to actually go to my tablet. So you can see what we did where we picked on the tree, that target area that we picked on the tree, that was the gray of the gradient that's right there. However, this area that's down below it is actually got more it's a darker gray that's actually down in here. So I feel like I can actually clean this up a little bit. So I'm just going to do it using the clone stamp tool. And I'm going to do it starting right over here on this edge. I've got this guideline that I've pulled down. So I'm going to hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. I'm going to make it a medium softness. That's typically what its default is, about a 50% softness. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. I'm going to sample this color. That's a little too big. I'm going to sample the color that is on the far right edge. Holding down the Option key, it'll sample that color. And then I'm simply going to come over to the tree and I'm going to click and drag out. And that is not doing a thing. Why can that be? Say what? Yeah, but I only need the current layer. That's all that's... Oh, you're absolutely right. Thank you. I was thinking this is all on one layer. It's not all on one layer yet. So set your clone stamp tool to current and below and try that again. And so this now ultimately ends up, I think, being slightly better for how the tree is going to actually blend out. So that's the line that I'm going to go with anyway. I take that back. Hang on one second. That's actually too high on that because we still need that same gray color, that lighter gray color, to actually be down lower. And I actually just got rid of that. So Command Z to go back, Command Option Z to go back to the other one, and we're going to do this lower right now. So I'm going to start down lower. I don't want to go above that line with my clone stamp tool. So again, Option, come over here, and then click to pull this part out. And then I can come back the same way. Close enough. Okay, so we need to save this as a channel. So the easiest way to do it is to simply copy one of your channels. I'm just going to drag the blue channel down to the little plus icon at the bottom of that, and I'm going to rename it Depth Map. And it's important to name this thing for what it is, DEPTHMAP. And now you can throw all that stuff away. So the layer that was at the very top that had the silhouette of the girl on it, throw that away. Throw the gradient away as well. And I've got another gradient that's down in here that I put in for somehow. Don't know how that guy got in there. But nonetheless, you should just come back to what the image looks like originally. So is everybody good on this part? Okay, so do you have what? Here, hang on one second. Do you have this? Okay, so simply go over to your channels palette. Again, this is a black and white image. All your RGB channels are just copies of this black and white channel. So just make a copy of it. Just click on the blue channel and drag it down to make a copy of it. We need a copy of this thing. Okay, and then double click on the thing that says blue copy or green copy or whatever and just call it Depth Map. Say what? Yeah, and then this, the stuff that made it, you can throw away that top layer, you can throw away the gradient fill layer, you can also, I had another gradient thing that was going on somewhere in there, but again, I'm good to go. So now basically you should be back where we are. You should have a depth map that's sitting at the bottom of your channels palette and just the figure by herself. Did that work for everyone? Jack? I'm sorry, what? Yeah. So somehow the tree got put in the cells. It wouldn't have been there. It's in this thing right down here. So at this stage of the game, so guys, there's a trick here that you need to see. or you need to hear about. So unfortunately, somewhere back in time, Jack actually ended up putting that gray tree on the background that was at the very bottom. So to fix that, we need to go back into history. However, I don't want to lose all the work that he's done. So come up to the image menu. You can follow this if you just do your whole, just look at yours. Come down to duplicate image. Go ahead and hit duplicate. Say OK. That will actually make a copy of it that's got the same problem that he has. Now go back to your original image. It'll be one of these tabs. That's why I hate tab behavior. And go back to the original when you opened it. So now pull your tabs apart so you can see both images. And select that guy, and then come back to this image that has the better background. Grab the background layer and drag it on top of that other image. It's not that, it's the same image. You need to be able to see both of these. That's why I don't use tabs.
Gotcha. What happened to it?
I don't know. Come up to your window menu, come all the way down. It's the copy one.
Yes. So,
Pull this tab off too. Actually, pull both of them off so you can see both, and pull that tab off as well. Great. Now select this image, grab that, drag it on top of this one, hold down the Shift key and let go. And then you can get rid of this guy and you can throw the other one away. But now you've got everything you need. Okay. So unfortunately, to do this, it does not work on smart objects, which it's sad, but again, it's so complicated, it's probably worth it, I guess. I don't know. You can't do it on a smart object. So this has to happen on the very top of your image. This is what you would be doing at the very end when you've got all of your compositing work done, when you've got all the elements the way you want them, when everything is, this is the step that you would take right before sharpening. So make sure you have the very top layer selected. Hold down the Command key, the Option key, the Shift key, and hit the letter E. We've done this keyboard shortcut a number of times. So again, hold down the Command key, Option key, Shift key, and the letter E. If you're on Windows, it's Control, Option, Shift, E, and you should get a merge stamp of everything that's sitting on the very top. Did that work for everyone? All right, so then this is how you use the tool. Come up to your filter menu, come down to blur, and then come over to lens blur. And open it up. You'll see we come into a completely separate workspace. And you can see over here on the side a series of controls. At the very top under the preview, for me, I typically click faster. This is a very intensive processor thing. I click faster until I get things adjusted the way I think I want them, and then I might click the more accurate preview before I go ahead and say OK to that. In the source for your depth map, there will be a drop-down menu, and it will have all of your channels that could be used as depth maps in it, but you have one that's actually called depth map because that's the one you just built. We're not going to use the second set focal point yet. I'm going to show you how that works in just a second. But we are going to come down to the lens, and you can actually see here in your lens, this is how you can control and emulate a type of lens. So in the shape drop-down menu, you can see what these are the number of blades of an aperture that you would have in a lens. Really cheap lenses have only 3 or 4 aperture blades. Really expensive lenses have much larger, greater number of aperture blades. This controls your bokeh. This controls how the stuff goes out of focus because it emulates your blade shape. So if you typically think of seeing those, hang on just one second, Jack. Seeing those headlights at night that are out of focus in an image, they're not perfect circles. They actually have lines to the sides of them, almost like a stop sign. You guys know what I'm talking about? That is controlled by the number of blades. If you only had 3 blades, those light bokehs in the background would be triangles. If you have a 4, it would actually be square. And when you get up into the 6, 7, and 8, they start to round around. An 8 blade will have more roundness to it. It won't have so many sharp edges. That's what's basically going on here. Jack. Okay. Radius is the radius of your aperture. The bigger it is, the more out of focus your image is. So take your radius right now and crank it all the way up. And you should see, it's going to take a little while to process this, but you should see your background actually going soft and your foreground actually not. I'm going to drag my radius up even higher. Just, what?
Mine's doing the exact opposite.
Okay, so in your case, we can actually change and set the focal point. So this is something everybody should know. So once you get the radius to go all the way up, so because I want it to seem over blurred so that you can really see what's happening. Click on this second focal point and then click on the figure. She will snap into focus. Anywhere you click with this set focal point will actually snap into focus. So click on the tree. The tree will go into focus, the girl will go out. Click on the background. Again, this is emulating exactly the way a lens would work by refocusing this image. Oh, it's nuts.
So with,
Yes.
so with the blur focal distance, for whatever reason, mine was moved up, not clicking.
Oh, the focal distance is what's screwing you up. Typically, when you start off, you want your focal distance at 0 because we set your depth map up correctly, and that is with the black actually being out of focus. What ends up happening is that if you drag it all the way up, it inverts it. Everything that was in white will be sharp, and everything that's in black will be out of focus.
Based on the...
Exactly, based on the depth map, exactly. So I'm going to drag mine back down. Again, click on the set focal point, make sure that it is set on the girl, although it will be because of the tone. The blade curvature of this again, we don't have it. I'm going to do this image at some point using lights and car lights in the city because it's easier to see what it's actually doing to the bokeh. But the blade curvature of this will actually change again what's out of focus. The rotation, you can actually rotate the bokeh. So again, if you imagine a triangle, you can actually, if that was the bokeh we were using, you can actually rotate the triangle so maybe the point is pointing up or it's pointing down or whatever. I mean, it lets you do all of this kind of stuff. We do not have spectral highlights in here. If we did, we could control their brightness. You could, so if it was that night scene in the city, you could make the traffic lights brighter by actually using this spectral highlights part. However, in this case, I've got the focus set right. The focus is too extreme, so I'm going to pull my radius back off on this to something that's a little bit more believable. So again, I'm looking at the tree, I'm looking at the background. This seems to be, for me, I'm around a 45. It seems to be actually a good place. You can use your check mark on the preview to turn it on and off to sort of see what's going on in here. It may still be a little bit strong at 45, so I'll drop it down. Because it's a full-length picture here. It's not like I'm shooting some massive telephoto portrait part. So again, use your preview to sort of go on and off and sort of get some idea. And so I'm around a 35. That feels pretty good to me. I actually am using a hex 6 for my blade shape, for my aperture shape. However, the last thing that we have a problem here with is, and you can see it if you zoom in on the tree, so I'm going to zoom in on the tree quite a bit. One of the problems that we run into, what you want to try to do is get an area where you can see part of the background and part of the girl at the same time. And you can see this whole redraw thing I'm having this huge amount of problem with. So I'm going to come in on the top of her shoulder. But again, every time we do a zoom, it's causing me to completely rewrite this. But when I come in here now and I get in sort of like close to her shoulder, what you see, and this is a clear indication of what's actually happening in here, what is your all's noise amount set to? If it's set to 0, this is the problem you run into doing any sorts of blurs on a digital file. If you blur this digital information, it removes any sense of grain that you would actually have. You have no sensor pixelate. You have no pixel. Again, the pixel content that you can actually see in the girl, you can see that there's a grain in the coat and that kind of stuff, but there's nothing in the image that we just blurred. In order for this to be believable, again, it would simply be pixels that are out of focus, but those pixels would still be there. You would still see that film grain, for lack of a better way of putting it. So we need to reintroduce it, and that's what this noise is about on the very bottom. I always set my noise to monochrome. You can go back and forth between uniform and Gaussian. Gaussian tends to be more aggressive, but I'm simply going to grab the amount. I'm going to leave it as uniform, and I'm going to grab the amount, and I'm going to pop it up to a 1. And I don't really see any grain that's happening in the background, so I'm going to take it up to a 2. And again, it's redrawing. You'll see this line at the very bottom, a blue line. That's your progress line, because again, this is very intensive. And now I can actually pick up a small amount of fill grain, especially if you look down on the leaves in here. It makes this whole thing more cohesive. And then again, I'm going to drop all the way back out. You could, at this stage of the game, click on the more accurate preview. I'm happy with the way this looks, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And that is how you do serious depth of field. Questions? All right, you can close this guy up. You do not need to save that. We're going to go back to our session number 10. I want to try to get through this part really quickly, guys, and we'll take a break. So I take that back. I take that back. I take that back. I take that back. Let's go for a quick break right now. This is a lot. The next thing is a lot. So I've got 7 minutes after. Make this a hard 10. Can you be back at 2:17? And we'll jump back into it.